I still wake up sometimes hearing the rain against the glass of the conference room. It was 2 a.m., the city below us reduced to a blur of wet asphalt and neon, but the silence inside was louder. We were rivals first, professionals second. Lovers? That was never part of the business plan. We had explicitly shaken hands on a specific clause, strictly professional. No personal questions, no drinks, no acknowledging the tension that had hummed between us for 3 years. But that rule evaporated the moment the laptop snapped shut. To understand why the air in that boardroom changed, you have to understand the war that came before the peace. My name is Camila, and I deal in absolutes. As the CEO of Vertex, I built an AI infrastructure based on zero-error precision. Code is clean. Emotions are messy variables I delete. Then there was Luna. She ran Nebula, a competing firm that treated algorithms like jazz improvisation. She was unflinching, sharp, and maddeningly effective. For 3 years, we circled each other like sharks in a shrinking tank. If I landed a cover story in Wired, she was the keynote at South by Southwest the next week. If I optimized a neural net to perfection, she released a feature that made mine look rigid. It was a Cold War fought with press releases and poached engineers. But underneath the corporate maneuvering, there was something else. A sultry, heavy tension that grew with every stolen headline. We tracked each other's movements with an obsession that bordered on unhealthy. I told myself it was competitive intelligence. It felt like something dangerous. The industry was contracting, and the Series B funding round was looming like a storm front. The venture capital firms made it clear. There wasn't enough oxygen in the room for both of us. Only one firm would survive the quarter. The pressure turned every email into a weapon, and every public appearance into a gladiator match. That dynamic peaked at the Innovate Summit in San Francisco. The organizers, sensing blood in the water, seated us next to each other. The lights were blindingly hot. Luna wore a white suit that looked like it cost more than my first car, sitting with a relaxed confidence that made my spine stiffen. The moderator, a tech journalist who enjoyed the drama, asked about the future of predictive logic. "The future is safety," I said, my voice steady. "Clients pay for certainty, not guesses." I felt Luna shift beside me. The scent of her perfume, sandalwood and something darker, like rain on hot pavement, drifted into my space. It was distracting. It was calculated. She leaned toward her microphone, her movement fluid. "Certainty is stagnant, Camila," she purred, her voice dropping an octave, intimate despite the crowd of 500. "You build cages. I build wings. That's why my user base is growing while yours is stabilizing." The crowd murmured. It was a direct hit. I turned to her, meeting her gaze. Her eyes were dark, amused, challenging me to step out of the safety zone. "Wings are useless if you crash on takeoff," I shot back, keeping my tone cool, though my pulse hammered against my collarbone. "My clients want to arrive alive." She laughed then, a low, throaty sound that shouldn't have belonged in a panel discussion. "Living isn't just about surviving the flight," she countered. The banter was charged, electric. We weren't just debating code. We were testing each other's armor. Every barb was a compliment to the other's competence, wrapped in an insult. The audience watched us like it was a tennis match, head swiveling between my rigid posture and her languid grace. I hated how good she was. I hated that she knew exactly which buttons to press to make me lose my composure. But more than that, I hated the way my skin prickled when she looked at me with that knowing smirk. We walked off that stage without shaking hands, the silence between us vibrating with adrenaline. We thought we were fighting for dominance, but the market had a different strategy. The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning. Marcus Sterling, the venture capitalist holding the leash on both our futures, didn't request a meeting. He commanded an audience. His office was a glass box suspended 40 floors above the financial district, designed to induce vertigo. I arrived 4 minutes early. Luna arrived 2 minutes late, breezing in with a terrifying lack of urgency. She took the seat opposite me, tossing her hair back. The air in the room immediately shifted, becoming heavier, charged with the dangerous static of our proximity. Marcus didn't waste time on pleasantries. He sat at the head of the mahogany table, looking at us with the weary patience of a parent addressing squabbling toddlers. "The market is cooling," he said, his voice flat. "Series B funding is drying up. Investors are scared. They want stability and scale. Vertex has stability. Nebula has scale. Separately, you are risky bets. Together, you are a unicorn." The word hung in the sterile air. Together. My stomach dropped, a physical sensation of freefall. "You want an acquisition?" I asked, keeping my voice clinically level. "No," Marcus corrected. "A merger, equal partnership. Combine the code bases for the Q3 pitch. If you pull it off, you get the capital. If you don't, I pull the plug on both." Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. I looked at Luna. For the first time, her mask slipped. The amused smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine shock. We were being forced into a marriage of convenience, and neither of us had brought a dowry. "This is a mistake," Luna said, her voice sharp. "Her code is rigid. It will strangle my architecture." "And her architecture is a house of cards," I countered immediately. "You're asking me to build a skyscraper on a swamp. My clients need precision, not improvisation." "I'm asking you to survive," Marcus said, standing up. "You have 48 hours to draft a preliminary agreement. Figure it out." He walked out, leaving us alone in the transparent cage. The room suddenly felt microscopic. Without the audience, without the moderator, without the stage lights, the distance between us collapsed. We were sitting across a table barely 3 feet wide. I could see the faint tension in her jaw, the way her fingers gripped her pen until the knuckles turned white. The air conditioning hummed, a low drone that did nothing to cool the sudden, stifling heat in the room. Luna turned to me. The playfulness from the panel was gone. Her gaze was assessing, cold. "I don't want this," she said. "Do you think I do?" I replied, opening my laptop to occupy my hands. "I built Vertex to be precise. You build on intuition. This is going to be a disaster." "Controlled chaos," she corrected, leaning forward. That movement brought her into my personal space. The scent hit me again, her woodsy perfume. Up close, it wasn't just sandalwood. There was amber in it, something warm and heavy. It invaded my senses, bypassing logic. I hated that she smelled good. I hated that even in this disaster, she looked impeccable. "We don't have a choice," I said, my voice tight. "Marcus isn't bluffing. We merge or we liquidate." Luna sighed, a long exhale that seemed to deflate her posture just a fraction. She looked tired. For a second, I saw the woman behind the brand, exhausted, cornered, fighting for her life's work. "Fine," she said, extending a hand. "We merge, but on my terms." "Equal partnership," I reminded her, staring at her hand. It was slender, capable, dangerous. "We'll see," she murmured. I took her hand. Her skin was cool, her grip firm. It wasn't a handshake. It was a tactile assessment. A challenge. The contact lingered a fraction of a second too long, a spark of static jumping between us. I pulled back abruptly, my skin tingling where she had touched me. "Strictly professional," I said, setting the first boundary of our new world. "We integrate the systems, we prep the pitch, we secure the money. Then we figure out how to untangle this mess." Luna looked at me, her eyes darkening, a ghost of a smile returning to her lips. "Strictly professional," she agreed. "I wouldn't have it any other way." We signed the papers right there, the scratch of the pen loud in the quiet room. We drafted the initial press release. We partitioned the servers. We did everything right. We thought we were signing a peace treaty, creating a sterile environment. We were arrogant. We signed the papers, but the real negotiation was just beginning. We called it the Treaty of Silence, though it wasn't quiet. It was a negotiated ceasefire in a war that had been raging for years. We established the ground rules before we even plugged in the monitors. We rented a neutral workspace in Soma, a converted warehouse with exposed brick and too much natural light. A war room that felt disturbingly like a cage match arena. I taped the production schedule to the wall. Luna immediately covered it with sticky notes and abstract diagrams. We sat down across the expansive, empty desk and verbally ratified the strictly professional pact. It was a verbal contract as binding as the merger agreement Marcus had forced us to sign. Rule 1. No personal questions about life outside these four walls. Rule 2. No drinks after work, no getting-to-know-you sessions. Rule 3. No acknowledging the tension that made the air conditioner feel obsolete. We were effectively colleagues, nothing more. We would merge the code, secure the funding, and go back to our separate corners of the ecosystem. But the ecosystem inside that room was volatile. My working style is surgical. I write code in silence, documenting every function, building a cathedral of logic brick by brick. I need order to breathe. Luna worked like she was conducting a storm. She paced the length of the room. She muttered to herself in rapid-fire bursts. She played ambient electronic music that sounded like a robot having a panic attack. She would stare out the window for 20 minutes, watching the fog roll over the city, then type furiously for 5, producing code that was messy, undocumented, and brilliant. It drove me insane. I'd find her functions woven into my clean architecture like wild vines choking a trellis, organic, unpredictable, and impossible to prune without killing the whole system. "You didn't comment this block," I'd say, pointing at her screen with my stylus, keeping my physical distance. "The code speaks for itself," she'd reply without looking up, her fingers flying across the keys. "It's poetry, Camila. Try to read the rhythm instead of the syntax." For the first week, we maintained the frost. But exhaustion is a solvent. It dissolves resolve. It was a Thursday, 10 days into the merger, and we were both running on stale coffee and adrenaline. The office building had emptied out hours ago. The janitorial staff had come and gone, their vacuum cleaners a distant hum that emphasized our isolation. It was just us and the blue light of the monitors. I ordered takeout, Thai food, spicy enough to wake us up. When the delivery arrived, we didn't retreat to separate desks like we usually did. We were too tired to maintain the perimeter. We sat on the floor near the whiteboard, the cartons spread out between us, surrounded by erased equations. Luna had tied her hair back with a pen, loose strands falling around her face. She looked less like a corporate shark and more like the brilliant, exhausted engineer she actually was. She took a bite of pad thai and closed her eyes, letting out a groan of appreciation that was entirely too human. "I haven't eaten a real meal in 3 days," she admitted, her voice rough with fatigue. "Does Marcus think we're photosynthesizing?" It was a crack in the armor, a violation of Rule 1. I should have ignored it. Instead, I answered. "He thinks we're machines. That's why he invested." Luna opened her eyes and looked at me. Her guard was down. Her expression wasn't sharp or calculating. It was soft, shadowed by the same fear I was burying under checklists. "I'm not a machine, Camila," she said quietly. "I'm terrified this isn't going to work. If we fail, I lose everything. My team, my patents, the last 5 years of my life." I stopped eating. This was the vulnerability I had trained myself to ignore, the humanity I deleted from my assessments of her. Seeing it now, raw and unpolished, did something dangerous to my resolve. It made me want to reassure her. "We won't fail," I said, and my voice lacked its usual sterile command. "Your algorithms are creative. My infrastructure is solid. We'll make it work." She smiled then, a small, genuine thing that didn't reach her eyes but warmed the space between us anyway. Creative? Was that a compliment, CEO? "Don't get used to it," I deflected, but the bite was gone. "I'm just saying, your chaos has its uses. And your rigidity has its charms," she teased back. The banter had shifted. It wasn't the barbed wire of the panel discussion. It was something softer, playful. We were testing the boundaries of the treaty, tapping on the glass to see if it would hold. We finished the meal talking about bad coffee and worse investors, skirting the edge of the personal without crossing the line. But the energy in the room had changed. The hostility had evaporated, replaced by a companionable silence that felt far more dangerous. We went back to work, but I could feel her presence in a new way, not as a threat, but as a gravitational pull. The walls we built were glass, and we were throwing stones. The timeline tightened like a tourniquet. With 14 days left until the pitch, the calendar on the wall became a countdown to execution. The luxury of getting to know you was gone. We were in survival mode. Late nights ceased to be the exception and became the governing law of our existence. The office emptied out by 6, the cleaning crews by 8, leaving us alone in the cavernous silence of the warehouse. The world outside the floor-to-ceiling windows reduced itself to a backdrop, the glittering, indifferent grid of San Francisco, a sea of fog and taillights that felt light years away from the crisis center we inhabited. Inside, the atmosphere changed. The sterile air conditioning was replaced by the low, steady hum of the server stack in the corner, a white noise frequency that burrowed into my skull. It was intimate in a way corporate environments are never designed to be. We were sharing takeout containers, sharing silence, sharing the same recycled air for 16 hours a day. And in that isolation, the sensory details I usually filtered out began to scream for attention. It started with the proximity. The blueprints for the merged architecture were too large for a single screen, so we laid them out on the central table, physical proofs of our digital marriage. To read them, we had to stand shoulder to shoulder. The first time our arms brushed, it was an accident. I was reaching for a red marker, she was reaching for her tablet. Her forearm grazed mine, warm, soft skin against my tailored blazer. And the contact sent a jolt of static through me that had nothing to do with the dry air. I pulled back as if I'd been burned. Luna didn't. She paused, her hand hovering in the air, her eyes catching mine for a fraction of a second before returning to the schematic. It happened again. Fingertips brushing as we passed the stylus, knees bumping under the table during a code review. Each touch was a data point I tried to delete, but the system refused to clear the cache. The air between us grew charged, thickening with a tension that was no longer just competitive. It was heavy, viscous, like the atmosphere before a lightning strike. I found myself tracking her movements in the reflection of my monitor, hypersensitive to the rhythm of her breathing, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was frustrated. Then came the whiteboard session. We were arguing over a data ingestion node, my precision clashing with her need for speed. I was standing at the board, marker in hand, sketching a rigid, safe pipeline. "It's too slow, Camila," Luna said. Her voice was right behind me. "It's secure," I countered, refusing to turn around. "Security is the product. Speed is the currency. Move." She didn't wait for me to step aside. She stepped into my personal space, her body eclipsing the light. She reached around me, her left arm boxing me in against the board, to draw a bypass line in blue ink. The proximity was sudden, suffocating, and undeniably sultry. She was inches away. I could feel the heat radiating from her chest, could smell that maddening perfume, amber and rain, flooding my senses. She leaned in to cap the marker, and her breath ghosted over the shell of my ear. "See?" she whispered, the word vibrating through my spine. "If you cut the corner here, you save 3 milliseconds. I stared at the blue line. She was right. The logic held. But my brain wasn't processing the algorithm. It was processing the curve of her neck, the terrifying closeness of her mouth to my jaw. My heart hammered a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. I should have moved. I should have pushed her back and reasserted the strictly professional clause. But I didn't. I stood there, trapped between the whiteboard and the woman who was supposed to be my enemy, and realized with a sinking dread that I didn't want her to move. The intellectual victory of the code was inextricably bound to the physical rush of her presence. 3 milliseconds, I managed to say, my voice sounding rough, foreign. "It adds up," she murmured, pulling back slowly, letting the cool air rush into the space between us. She walked back to her side of the table, leaving me staring at the board, trying to steady my hands. I was a creature of logic. I built systems that didn't fail. But as I looked at her, bent over her laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating the sharp line of her jaw, I acknowledged the internal error. The brain wanted the deal. The body, traitorous and illogical, wanted the rival. We were professionals. We were disciplined. We were safe. Until Tuesday. The timestamp on the server log read 1:14 a.m. when the catastrophe hit. We had been working in a fugue state for 6 hours. The only sound, the rhythmic clatter of mechanical keyboards and the drumming of rain against the warehouse skylights. Then, the central monitor flashed red. It wasn't a warning. It was a fatality. A segmentation fault in the core logic layer, the exact place where my rigid architecture met her fluid algorithms. The demo build collapsed. The silence that followed was absolute. Terrifying. Then it shattered. "I told you," I said, my voice low and trembling with exhaustion. I stood up, the chair scraping violently against the concrete floor. "I told you that recursive loop was unstable. You didn't document the exit condition." Luna spun around, her eyes blazing. The fatigue that had been weighing her down vanished, replaced by a sharp, crystalline anger. "It's not the loop, Camila. It's your garbage collector. It's choking the process because you won't let the code breathe. You're strangling the AI before it can even think." "I'm keeping it from crashing," I shouted, the volume of my own voice startling me. "Which is exactly what just happened. Because you don't trust the system." She was on her feet now, matching my volume. "Just like you don't trust me. You've been vetting every line I write like I'm a junior dev. I built a company from nothing, just like you." "You built a house of cards," I countered, stepping around the desk. "And I'm the one who has to keep it standing when the wind blows." "You're arrogant," she spat, stepping toward me. "You think because you made the cover of Wired first, you own the truth? And you're reckless," I shot back, closing the distance. "You poached my lead engineer 3 years ago because you couldn't train your own." "I poached him because he was bored," she yelled. And now we were standing inches apart in the center of the room, the red light of the failed monitor casting long, violent shadows against the brick walls. "He wanted to build wings, and you were making him build cages." We were breathing hard, chests heaving, the air between us vibrating with 3 years of suppressed conflict. The argument had stripped away the veneer of the strictly professional agreement. We weren't colleagues anymore. We were rivals. We were enemies. And God, it felt good. It felt real. Then the shift happened. It wasn't a decision. It was a change in atmospheric pressure. I looked at her, really looked at her. Her pupils were dilated, swallowing the green of her irises. Her skin was flushed, a map of heat rising from the collar of her silk blouse. The anger didn't dissipate. It transmuted. It turned into something heavy, something molten. The shouting died in our throats, but the energy didn't leave the room. It just changed frequency. The silence stretched intimately, pulling tight like a wire about to snap. My gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. She saw it. She didn't flinch. The strictly professional rule hung in the air between us, a fragile, transparent barrier. Luna challenged it. She didn't speak. She didn't step back. She stepped in. It was a microscopic movement, a shift of weight, but it crossed the invisible line we had drawn in the sand. She looked at me with an expression that was terrifyingly open. No mask, no boardroom armor, just the raw, unflinching desire of a woman who is tired of fighting the wrong war. "The code is broken," she whispered, her voice rough. "We have to fix it," I replied. But I made no move toward the computers. "We can't fix it like this," she murmured. Her hand moved. It was slow, deliberate, giving me every chance to stop her. She placed her palm flat against my waist, her thumb pressing into the fabric of my blazer. The heat of her touch burned through the layers, branding me. It was a breach of contract. It was grounds for termination. It was the only thing in the world I wanted. My resolve crumbled. The logic, the precision, the control, it all evaporated. I reached out and grabbed the lapels of her jacket, pulling her to me. The crash of our lips was violent, a desperate collision of years of pent-up frustration and intellectual rivalry. It wasn't soft. It was exacting. It was a release. I kissed her with the same intensity I brought to my work, needing to know the shape of her, the taste of her, the reality of her. She met me with equal force, her hands tangling in my hair, pulling me closer until there was no space left for air, let alone professionalism. We stumbled back, hitting the edge of the desk, sending a stack of blueprints sliding to the floor. We didn't care. The only thing that mattered was the friction, the heat, the undeniable fact that the rivalry had been a cover story for this terrifying electric need that finally had a name. The sun rose on a different world, one we hadn't accounted for in the spreadsheets. The morning light in San Francisco is unforgiving. It is a gray, diffuse glare that exposes every flaw in the architecture, every smudge on the glass, and every crack in the professional armor you've spent a decade welding shut. I woke up on the leather sofa in the break area, my blazer folded neatly on the floor, a testament to a moment where order had been abandoned for something far more volatile. The warehouse was silent again, but the silence had changed texture. It wasn't the hollow, echoing quiet of a workspace waiting to be filled. It was the heavy, saturated quiet of a room that had witnessed a collapse. I sat up, the stiffness in my neck a physical reminder of the night's transgression. I looked across the room. Luna was already up. She was standing by the window, staring out at the fog, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She turned when she heard me move. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her blouse buttoned to the collar. The armor was back in place. But her eyes gave her away. They were soft, guarded, holding a memory that neither of us could delete. Walking to her felt like crossing a minefield. I took the coffee she offered. Our fingers didn't brush this time. We were both careful, painfully precise in our avoidance. "The code compiled," she said. Her voice was steady, but it lacked the usual sharp edge. "It did?" I asked, taking a sip. The coffee was bitter, scalding. It grounded me. At 4 a.m., the garbage collector. You were right. It needed a hard limit. And the recursive loop? I added the exit condition, she admitted, looking down at the steam rising from her cup. It needed structure. We were talking about code, but we weren't talking about code. We were talking about the surrender we had both made in the dark. We stood there in the kitchenette, surrounded by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic, trying to rebuild the walls we had demolished. "Camila," she started, finally looking at me. "Strictly professional," I interrupted, the phrase tasting like ash in my mouth. That was the deal. Luna looked at me, a flicker of disappointment crossing her face before the mask slammed back down. "Right. Strictly professional. It was a stress reaction, adrenaline, lack of sleep." "Exactly," I lied. "An anomaly. We patch it, we move on." But moving on proved impossible the moment the engineering teams arrived. We held a stand-up meeting at 10. Usually, these meetings were battlegrounds, where her developers rolled their eyes at my protocols, and my engineers scoffed at her spaghetti code. Today, the atmosphere was bizarrely synchronized. I was explaining the integration strategy for the API. "We need to ensure the latency stays under 50 milliseconds, I said, pointing to the projection. "If the handshake fails, the user loses trust," Luna finished for me. She was leaning against the back wall, arms crossed. "Camila is right. We can't trade stability for speed on the login. Lock it down." My head snapped toward her. The room went quiet. Luna never agreed with me on latency. She met my gaze, a small, secret smile playing on her lips. It wasn't a concession. It was a partnership. The banter that followed wasn't the usual power struggle. When she teased me about my color-coded spreadsheets, it didn't sting. It felt like a caress. When I corrected her terminology regarding the database schema, she didn't bristle. She nodded, accepting the precision because she now knew the intent behind it. The team looked between us, confused by the sudden lack of bloodshed. They didn't know that the war had ended because the generals had been compromised. Throughout the day, the sensory triggers I had fought so hard to ignore became overwhelming. Her perfume, that mix of sandalwood and rain, was no longer an annoyance I could file away. It was a distraction that derailed my train of thought every time she walked past my desk. I found myself tracking her location in the room, not out of suspicion, but out of a magnetic necessity. I knew when she was pouring water. I knew when she was frustrated with a line of Python. I felt her presence like a phantom limb. Late that afternoon, we ended up alone in the server room, checking the physical connections for the demo hardware. The noise of the fans was deafening, a roar that created a private bubble within the office. I was kneeling, checking a cable. Luna stood over me, holding the flashlight. "We're good at this," she said, her voice barely audible over the fans. I stood up, dusting off my knees. We were close again. Too close. The strictly professional rule felt like a joke we were both tired of telling. The merger? I asked, knowing the answer. Us, she corrected. She reached out, her hand hovering near my waist, remembering the path it had taken the night before dropping to her side. Last night wasn't an anomaly, Camila. You know that. I looked at the blinking lights of the server rack, the heartbeat of the thing we were building together. My logic demanded I deny it. My data said otherwise. We have a pitch in 10 days, I whispered, the confession hanging heavy in the cool air. We can't afford complications. We're already complicated, she murmured, stepping back as the door handle turned. We thought we could compartmentalize. We were wrong. The honeymoon phase of our secret alignment lasted exactly 48 hours. That's the problem with the tech industry. Silence is expensive, but noise is fatal. On Thursday, a rumor leaked on Blind. An anonymous source claimed our merger was a desperate attempt to hide failing valuations, that Vertex was bleeding cash, and Nebula's tech stack was fundamentally broken. It was a competitor's move, clumsy, brutal, and effective. Our valuation took a hit before the market even opened. Marcus called us at 6 a.m. He didn't scream. He just told us to pack our bags. We had a dinner meeting in Los Angeles that night with Sterling's biggest limited partner, a man named Silas Vance, who viewed software companies as high-stakes poker chips. If we didn't convince him the marriage was solid, the funding round was dead. We flew commercial to keep a low profile, sitting shoulder to shoulder in Economy Plus. Luna spent the flight dissecting the leak, her anger radiating off her in waves. I spent the flight dissecting her. I watched her hands move as she highlighted PDFs, the way she bit her lip when she was thinking. We were operating in a strange, suspended reality. Partners in public, lovers in secret, and soldiers in a war that was rapidly escalating. The dinner was at a hotel bar in Beverly Hills, a place designed to make you feel underdressed and overexposed. The lighting was low, amber-hued, and designed to facilitate secrets. Silas Vance was already there, nursing a scotch that cost more than my first server rack. He was an old-school shark, the kind who looked at founders and saw only liabilities. He didn't waste time on appetizers. They say you're merging out of weakness, Vance said, swirling his glass. He looked at Luna. They say your algorithms are flashy but unstable, that you can't scale without breaking. I felt Luna tense beside me. Her instinct was to fight, to pull out the data and prove him wrong. But that was defensive. I put my hand on the table, just close enough to hers to register the heat without touching. Her algorithms aren't unstable, I said, my voice cutting through the ambient jazz. They're adaptive. The market calls it volatility because they don't understand the math. I do. I've audited her code. It doesn't break. It flexes. Vance raised an eyebrow, shifting his gaze to me. And you? They say Vertex is a dinosaur. Too rigid, too slow for the current cycle. She's not slow, Luna interjected, her voice low and dangerous. She turned to look at me, and for a second, I forgot Vance was there. Camila is precise. In a market full of people breaking things and calling it progress, she builds things that actually work. You don't pay her for speed. You pay her for the guarantee that when you land, the runway is actually there. It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to me. Vance looked between us. He was looking for cracks, for the hesitation of two rivals forced into a shotgun wedding. Instead, he found a phalanx. We finished each other's sentences. We anticipated each other's logic. When I cited a retention metric, Luna immediately contextualized it with growth potential. When she pitched a risky feature, I immediately backed it with a risk mitigation strategy. We weren't just a merger. We were a single, terrifyingly efficient organism. You two, Vance said finally, signaling for the check. You have chemistry. I expected a boardroom brawl. Instead, I get a united front. He signed the receipt without looking at the total. Fix the leak, kill the rumor, I'm in. We walked him to his car with professional grace, shaking hands, smiling until the valet drove him away. Then we turned back to the hotel. The adrenaline was crashing through my system, a heady mix of victory and the unbearable tension of having performed perfection for 2 hours. We stepped into the elevator. There were other people in the lobby, but the car was empty. I pressed the button for the 14th floor. The doors slid shut, sealing us in polished steel and silence. The transition was instantaneous. The CEO persona evaporated. Luna didn't say, "Good job." She didn't debrief the meeting. She turned to me, her eyes dark, and backed me against the mirrored wall. "You defended my code," she whispered, her hands finding my waist, gripping the fabric of my blazer. "You defended my precision," I replied, my breath catching as she stepped into my space. "It works," she murmured, leaning in until her lips were inches from mine. "We work." The elevator hummed, rising against gravity. We were suspended in a metal box, safe from the investors and the rumors and the world that wanted us to fail. She kissed me then, not like the desperate collision in the warehouse, but with a slow, possessive heat that claimed everything I had just defended downstairs. It was a reward. It was a promise. We were winning the war, but losing the battle for control. The high from Los Angeles evaporated the moment our phones reconnected to the network. We were standing at baggage claim, the air between us still warm with the memory of the elevator, when the notification chime shattered the mood. It wasn't just a leak this time. It was a deluge. A tech blog known for its brutality had published a deep dive titled "The Desperation Merger: Why Vertex is Cannibalizing Nebula." The article didn't just speculate on our financials. It painted a narrative of predation. It claimed I had orchestrated the merger to absorb Luna's technology and discard her leadership, citing anonymous internal sources that sounded suspiciously like board members we both trusted. We took a cab back to the warehouse in silence. The fog had rolled in, turning the city into a gray, suffocating ghost town. Inside the war room, the atmosphere was brittle. Luna paced the length of the floor, her heels clicking a sharp, agitated rhythm against the concrete. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the article on her tablet, her expression tightening with every scroll. "They think I'm selling out," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "They think I'm letting you gut my company for parts." "It's just noise," I said, trying to summon the confidence I had displayed for Vance. I reached out to touch her arm, a reflex born of the last 48 hours. She pulled away. It was a small movement, barely a flinch, but it felt like a door slamming shut. "Is it noise? Or is it the truth, Camilla? You've been obsessed with my code architecture since day one. Maybe the market sees what I was too busy looking at your mouth to notice." The accusation hit me in the chest. But instead of reassurance, my brain defaulted to its factory setting: analysis. I am a creature of logic. I look for variables and outcomes, and suddenly the data points of the last week rearranged themselves into a terrifying new pattern. The sudden cooperation, the vulnerability over takeout, the heated, desperate intimacy in the elevator right before the most critical meeting of our careers. "Is that what you think?" I asked, my voice cooling, the professional mask sliding back into place to protect the hurt blooming in my chest. "Or is this projection? You needed this deal, Luna. You needed my stability to survive the quarter. What better way to ensure I signed off on the integration than to compromise my judgment?" Luna stopped pacing. She turned to me slowly. The room went dead silent. The hum of the servers seemed to vanish. "Are you asking if I slept with you to close a seed round?" "I'm asking if the intimacy was a tactic," I said, the words tasting like bile. "I deal in precision. Feelings are variables. You're the master of improvisation. Maybe I'm just another improv." I wanted her to deny it. I wanted her to scream, to throw something, to break the tension with the same fire she used to debate algorithms. Instead, she went cold. The unflinching rival I had fought for 3 years returned in an instant. Her posture straightened. Her eyes, which had been so open and dark in the elevator, became opaque mirrors. She looked at me not with anger, but with a profound, terrifying disappointment. "If you think I am capable of that," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion, "then we have nothing to discuss but the pitch deck." "Luna," I started, realizing too late that I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "No," she cut me off, raising a hand. "You want safety? You want absolute certainty? Fine. Let's go back to the contract. No personal questions. No acknowledging the tension. Strictly professional." I didn't mean strictly professional. She enunciated each word like a verdict. She walked to the other side of the massive desk, putting the physical barrier of the blueprints between us. She opened her laptop and began typing, her focus absolute. The shift was instantaneous and devastating. The room, which had felt like a sanctuary of shared breath and secret touches, transformed back into a cage. The silence that followed wasn't the companionable quiet of two partners working in sync. It was an exile. The scent of her perfume, that maddening mix of sandalwood and rain, seemed to fade, scrubbed from the air by the antiseptic chill of her withdrawal. I sat at my station, staring at the lines of code that blurred before my eyes. I had won the argument. I had protected myself from the possibility of being played. But as the hours ticked by, marked only by the harsh white light of the monitors, I realized the cost of my logic. I had treated trust like a transaction, and she had closed the account. We worked through the night, efficient and lethal. We fixed the bugs, we polished the slides, we moved around each other with surgical care, ensuring our bodies never touched, our gazes never met. It was the most flawless work we had ever produced, and it felt like ash. I realized then, with a sinking dread, that the deal meant nothing if I had lost the connection that fueled it. The pitch was in 12 hours. We were partners on paper, strangers in the room. The conference room smelled of stale espresso and judgment. Marcus sat at the head of the mahogany table, flanked by 4 general partners who looked at us with the predatory boredom of people who had heard 1,000 pitches this year. We stood at the front, shoulder to shoulder, separated by a chasm of silence we had dug ourselves. The air between us wasn't charged, it was dead. I launched into the technical architecture. My delivery was flawless, a perfectly executed sequence of facts and figures. I built the logic brick by brick, demonstrating the stability of the new merged backend. But it was sterile. I was reciting a eulogy for a product that was supposed to be alive. I could feel the room drifting. Marcus checked his watch. They didn't want a schematic. They wanted a pulse. I turned to Luna for the handoff to the growth strategy. This was her domain, the vision, the scale, the magic. Usually, she snatched the narrative from me with effortless grace. Today, she hesitated. She looked at the investors, then at the blank screen, and finally at me. For the first time in 3 years, the unflinching mask was gone. In her eyes, I didn't see the shark. I saw the fear of a woman who believed she was standing alone. She opened her mouth, but the charisma didn't come. The silence stretched, agonizing and thick. Marcus frowned, leaning forward. The deal was dying in real time, suffocated by our estrangement. Logic dictated I take over. I should interrupt, steamroll her section, and salvage the valuation with cold, hard metrics. But looking at her, standing pale under the harsh fluorescent lights, I didn't see a liability. I saw the woman who had leaned into my space at the whiteboard. I saw the partner who had fixed my code at 4 a.m. I stepped closer, breaking the professional formation. Luna isn't pausing because she doesn't know the numbers, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. I turned to her, ignoring the investors, dropping the CEO armor completely. She's pausing because the numbers don't tell the story of what we survived this week. I held her gaze, offering the only thing I had left, absolute surrender. Tell them about the exit condition, Luna. Tell them how we stopped the crash. She blinked, and the connection reestablished. She saw the apology in my eyes, the trust I was handing her without a contract. She inhaled, and the color flooded back into her cheeks. She didn't just speak, she ignited. She took my rigid stability and wove it into a narrative of infinite scale. We fell into a rhythm that we hadn't rehearsed but knew by heart. I provided the ground, she provided the sky. We weren't 2 CEOs fighting for territory anymore. We were a binary star system, orbiting a shared center of gravity. The pitch didn't just land, it soared. When we finished, the room was silent, but it was the silence of respect, not boredom. We walked out 10 minutes later, leaving them to draft the term sheet. The hallway was empty, a long tunnel of glass and steel. The adrenaline was fading, leaving us exposed in the quiet. "You saved me," she said, leaning against the wall, refusing to look at me. "I backed my partner," I corrected. I stepped into her space, finally closing the distance I had created with my insecurities. The scent of her perfume, that sandalwood and rain, drifted between us, no longer a distraction, but a necessity. I was wrong, Luna. I treated trust like a data set I could verify. It's not. It's a leap of faith. She looked up, her eyes searching mine, the vulnerability raw and terrifying. And the rule? The rule was for rivals, I said, reaching for her hand. Her fingers laced with mine, warm and solid, grounding me in the reality of us. I don't want a rival. I want you. She squeezed my hand, a smile finally breaking through the exhaustion. Strictly unprofessional? Exclusively, I promised. We walked toward the elevators, hand in hand, ignoring the optics, ready to build something that couldn't be broken by a press release or a rumor. 6 months later, the only contract that matters is the one implied by her coffee mug sitting next to mine on a Sunday morning. The strictly professional rule is now a joke we share over breakfast, usually right before we're late for work. We took the risk, and the return on investment was infinite. If you've ever broken a rule for something real, subscribe for more stories.